Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. I'm Samantha and this is Trans IRL. Welcome back to everyone. We had a couple weeks off there, but we are very happy to be back on the air here tonight. And tonight we do talk with a journalist, writer, and academic who is a noted and award-winning contributor to queer literature and representation. So we're very excited to have her on. And she has a really cool name too. Joining me in the Trans IRL control room as always, after a couple of well-deserved weeks off, is Stephen. So we're getting close. We're in the final couple weeks here before the presidential election here in the U.S. And how are you feeling about it?
26 days. I think the events of the last couple of weeks are kind of tipping the scales a little bit. I think the polls are heading distinctively blue. And of course, there's still time for those. I have already mailed in my ballot, which is great. If you're around the country, it may not be too late to do that. And we did want to share a couple of resources for you to go, so it's not too late. There are some websites you can head to. And there are a couple of places you can go. The U.S. government has a website called usa.gov with how to vote. And the Democratic National Committee has a great website called iwillvote.com. And of course, the National Center for Transgender Equality has a wonderful site also called transformthevote.org, which links you through. And one of the featured guests on there, of course, is Aiden, who was on our show very recently.
We just spoke with Aiden a few weeks ago. Yeah. So wonderful. Definitely, everyone out there, if you haven't voted yet, vote. Make sure to get out there. Every vote counts. It's so important this election cycle and every election cycle that we are heard. So thank you for sharing those, Stephen. And of course, Stephen will be monitoring the chats tonight. So if you have any questions for our guest or myself, please make sure to submit them there.
Good evening,
Let's go ahead and
everybody.
get on with the interview. All right. Tonight, our guest is a GLAAD Award-winning journalist and former reporter for the Daily Beast and Fusion. She holds a PhD in women's, gender, and sexuality studies from Emory University, and in 2019 published her debut book, Real Queer America, which took a closer look at queer identities and communities in conservative America. Today, she has a new work premiering on Audible, M2WTF, which takes a lighter look at transition and the funny and sometimes outrageous things that trans people face along the way. So with that, I would like to welcome Samantha Allen to the show. Samantha, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real privilege to be here with you.
Well, the privilege is all ours. And I have to say, it's sort of unique having another Samantha on the show. This is the first time this has ever happened.
It was confusing in the pre-show, understanding which Samantha Stephen was referring to.
But I've found that as a trans woman in her 30s, when I'm in a room of other trans women in their 30s, about half of us are named Samantha. So I'm sort of used to it at this point.
Yeah, it's a popular name, but it was also I'm 33, and I feel like Samantha was a popular name around our birth years. So I feel like it sort of works. I don't know. It's sort of fitting that when we're around each other, there's usually half of us are usually Samanthas.
That's it. I mentioned Real Queer America in the intro there just very shortly. I think it's such an amazing contribution to queer literature, especially in the unique socio-political times that we're in today. Over the course of that book, you were really traveling during some of the toughest times for trans individuals in Trump's first term, where there were efforts being made to enact the ban of the military. Lots of states were working on bathroom bills. And it just casts such a positive tone to the work being done in trans communities and queer communities across the country. I think part of the unique situation that we face today is the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett to fill what was Ruth Bader Ginsburg's seat on the Supreme Court. What are your thoughts on adding a justice so ideologically different from her predecessor? And what are the implications of this confirmation for both women's and LGBT rights?
It is honestly scary. So much of LGBTQ rights in the absence of being able to pass comprehensive federal legislation has happened through the Supreme Court over the last 10 years. If you think about marriage equality with Obergefell or these most recent employment protections with Bostock, and many transgender rights specific cases and many abortion rights specific cases are all kind of constantly trickling their way upward. I guess things don't trickle up. They're all kind of climbing their way upward toward the Supreme Court. And if they're going to hit a very like anti-LGBTQ, very conservative stonewall at that level, that has terrifying implications for our communities.
I think it's devastating. It really is to lose that voice on the Supreme Court. But at the same time, there is still so much that can and will be done, if not at the national level, at the state level. And I know there is a lot of fear in the trans community, but the Supreme Court, for as powerful as it is, still only has the power to really influence those federal level legislations. And I'm really hopeful that a lot of states will stand up and will continue to stand up for what they've been working on for years now. And that includes some states that have traditionally been perceived as conservative.
Yeah, we're seeing conversion therapy bans get passed by red states and in, local municipalities within red states that don't have state level bans. We're seeing states like New Hampshire that are kind of on the fence passing transgender rights protections. That's part of what I was trying to capture in Real Queer America, was all of this amazing local and state level advocacy that's kind of like taking action while people wait for these federal level protections. And that's work that's happening everywhere. And it's really vibrant and amazing work. I mean, part of what strikes me is the huge gulf between the likely composition of the Supreme Court in terms of LGBTQ issues and where the American people are on LGBTQ issues. If you poll Americans about how they feel about LGBTQ issues, overwhelmingly, almost every religious group in the country supports LGBT employment protections. Almost every denomination in the country has majority support for same-sex marriage. Like, we've crossed the Rubicon on this. Like, the American people's hearts and minds are kind of heading towards the right place on LGBTQ issues, like well past the halfway mark. And if we have a Supreme Court that, 6-3 is going to want to abolish same-sex marriage, it's just not going to sit right with where our own cultural center is on those issues.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And I think things will continue shifting that direction, especially as we, continue increasing visibility for the trans community, for the queer community in general. Hearts and minds, you mentioned that. That's really the driving force in changing society. It's very hard to just move the block all at once, right? But when we're working with individuals and we're actually making changes, it's not so much at the federal level as much as it is at the individual level. And that's really, I think, where advocates have the most ability to influence and enable change.
Yeah, it's this very micro level process. It's something that I spent, 2 months feeling and experiencing firsthand as I was driving across the country in 2017 doing research for that first book. People were having conversations with their, Mormon parents about being trans or non-binary. It's happening at this very individual level. I think if you look at 20th century LGBTQ history, it looks like, riots and protests and marches and these grand events that we can kind of put in the history books. And those are still happening now, of course, as this summer shows. But I think more and more what LGBTQ history, where the change and progress is happening, is in these places where you can't really see or you can't really access. It's a transgender daughter talking to her mom. It's a non-binary nephew talking to their uncle. It's these little conversations that kind of push people in the right direction.
You touched a little bit on the conservative nature of Utah, and a large part of that is the overwhelming presence of the Church of Latter-day Saints there. Their policies against transgender individuals are basically include excommunication for those who proceed with medical transition. I know this is a story close to your heart, but what I thought was really interesting was the contrast between the stance of the church and the queer communities in the state of Utah, including, queer individuals who identify as Mormon, and the thoughts and feelings of Mormons who have queer children. How do we explain the difference between the church and the people you spoke with on your trip through Utah?
I mean, it's honestly kind of the Supreme Court situation where you have this legacy group of like older authority figures who are kind of holding the church in one direction. And then you have younger members and parents of those younger members who are kind of tugging in the other direction. And time will inexorably march forward, I think. It was not changing fast enough to keep me in the Mormon church, but it is changing. I was raised Mormon. I left the Mormon church a few years before I started transitioning. But, that was really interesting to me to go back for Real Queer America and meet people who had made the decision to stay and say, it's the church that's going to have to change. Like, I'm not going anywhere. You have to change for me. And that was so mind-boggling to see, but also so like reassuring and heartwarming that, we see this in every faith group now. We see the conversations around LGBTQ inclusion in the Methodist church and, even in the Baptist church. And these are like really hard conversations that can lead to schisms and splits and tensions. But I don't think, and this is where my optimism comes from, even as everything feels chaotic and scary right now, I don't think in the long term you can stop LGBTQ equality from happening. We are too charming. We are too funny and charming and nice. And once people kind of stop being scared of us and start hanging out with us, they see that and they drop their prejudices, and you can't stop that from happening.
I think it's such a beautiful thing when parents support their kids unconditionally. As a parent, it's shocking to me that any parent wouldn't support their child unconditionally. But I was really moved by the Mormon parents in Provo who were at the center there for their kids. And that just meant a lot to me, especially I grew up in Phoenix, and there is a large Mormon population here in town. And I had a lot of Mormon friends growing up, and I saw friends that struggled with their identities because they were afraid. And this is in the late 90s, early 2000s, that time frame. But seeing some of the change, and kind of a funny story, but I had a really good friend growing up who was Mormon, and his mom hated me. Because I was the bad influence. I was the heretic, I guess. I'm not sure. One time she ran over my bicycle. I think she did it on purpose, but that's a different story. However, after I came out, and I switched all my Facebook pages over to the new name, and I started my Instagram, she started following me there, which I thought was really interesting. And not only did she follow me there, but she actually was posting nice comments and, oh, what a beautiful family. And it's like, wow, here's somebody who I never would have thought would have been necessarily somebody to accept me, but here she is being supportive. And this is a devout Mormon in the faith. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, if I could reach one person in that situation and hopefully help them see that, we're just trying to live our best lives here, that adds up. If I can influence one person, if everyone can influence just a few people to see that, we're here, we're not going anywhere. And really, we just want to be loved and cared for like anybody else. It makes all the difference in the world.
It's funny because something similar has happened to me. I left the church in 2008, around the time that the Mormon church was heavily involved in the Prop 8 campaign in California to make same-sex marriage illegal. And then I came out and started transitioning in 2012. And it was interesting. When I left in 2008, I kind of lost touch with a lot of people from the Mormon church. But after I came out and people sort of found out through the grapevine and found out on social media, slowly but surely the friend requests from distant cousins and family friends started trickling in. And at first I was suspicious. I was like, do you just want to look at me? Am I the zoo animal? You want to see what I look like now? That kind of thing. But as I started accepting people's requests, they would leave nice comments exactly how you described, or send me little messages, or say that they wanted to see me again.
Exactly. And I think that's wonderful. For the most part, those people do see you, and they'll remember you the next time that they're questioned as to their support for the LGBT community.
Yeah. I mean, it's really heartwarming to see, because like Utah has just had such struggles with LGBTQ youth homelessness, LGBTQ youth suicide. So like the more stories that I'm hearing of Mormon parents like with full hearts embracing their queer and trans kids, like it makes me want to cry, honestly, because it's like you need to get out of this bad situation and get into the kind of perfect loving families that Utah is supposed to be all about.
Reading through Real Queer America and listening to your new Audible book, M to WTF, which is a fantastic name, I'm struck by so many similarities in our stories. One in particular being the lies we tell ourselves, those attempts to justify or deny our identities before finally taking the leap and coming out. What do you think drives so many people deeper in the closet before ultimately deciding that they must come out?
I think when you grow up thinking that the world is going to hate you if you come out or if you lived as yourself, you want to rationalize, you want to come up with any excuse not to. So I was born in the late 80s. And so growing up in the 90s, like the only trans women that you see in movies and TV are like the characters where like the guy like kisses the trans woman and then he's like, oh my God, I'm so disgusted now that I discovered that that was a trans woman. And, and you see that on TV and you're like, oh, if I transitioned, I would be disgusting. I would be inspiring someone to vomit. I would be some terrible, like horrible, wretched monster. And that gets in your head. So you try to come up with any other explanation. And for me, that was like, oh, maybe I'm just a cross-dresser, or maybe, this is just some weird thing that I can pray away if I just believe in Mormonism hard enough. Or maybe if I just tried to be a more interesting looking man, I wouldn't want to transition anymore, or something like that. And it felt like a everything but the kitchen sink approach until finally settling on the Occam's razor answer of like, oh yeah, I'm trans.
For me, coming out finally after years of trying to push it down, it's funny now to look back on. Now it's funny. At the time it was terrifying, but anyone who would suggest that we're doing this on a whim or that this is, a choice to be trans, I tried everything. I tried absolutely everything. And so would anyone else. Who would want to go out of their way to go through this process, to potentially be shunned and shamed by family and friends alike? It's such a hard thing to wrap your head around when you're so afraid and you don't know what to expect. Just looking into the future at the start of my transition, I had no idea what to expect. The only thing I knew starting out was that I need to do this or I'm not going to be here. And having that revelation that this is who I am and this is what I need to do for myself is both exhilarating and terrifying, because we don't know what the next steps are at that point. Acceptance is such a big milestone, but oh my gosh, after acceptance, the fear kind of washes over you, because now you actually have to address and deal with it and move forward. And that's why I think some of the stories that you've written and shared are so important, because they help humanize the experience, not only for allies or people who are wanting to learn more, but also for people who are beginning this journey. And I think that trans narratives are essential in really lighting the way for those who are on this journey as well.
Yeah, it's that moment where after you kind of come to terms with it yourself, you have to take that like Indiana Jones like leap of faith over the abyss, like sprinkle the sand and then jump out into the gap. It's terrifying, honestly. And I think sometimes when we tell our stories, because we already know how they end, we can package them in this very neat way of here's the start, and then I knew, and then I came out, and then I transitioned. And I wanted with M to WTF to kind of write something that felt very present and in the moment of like, this was confusing and weird and messy and funny. I like what you said of like, it wasn't a funny at the time, but it's funny now. Like, that's basically the thesis statement of this audiobook is like, I was dealing with memories of pre-transition and early transition memories that I was like, oh God, that was really uncomfortable. That was really awkward. That, me being a teenager hiding from my parents, I cringe at that. Or me, having to go to the doctor's office and get laser hair removal from, a dermatologist in Georgia who is, predominantly just freezing the fat in people's faces, or like a normal dermatological treatment, not me coming in being like, hey, I'm trans, do you know what trans people are, and can you get rid of my facial hair? Like, these were terrible things for me to remember. But then as more time passed from them, I was able to stop being like, oh, I this makes me uncomfortable, and just start laughing at it, because it just became hilarious to me, not having been in the moment for a while.
Absolutely. I don't know where the line is. I'm about almost 4 years into my transition, but as time goes on, you have to look back and just laugh sometimes, because it's ridiculous. The things we went through, the coming out stories of doom, you have to laugh at them. In the moment, they're so stressful, but that's what I really love about the new Audible book. I think it's such a fun look at the process, and maybe because I'm at the point where I'm at, I can laugh with you. I don't know if it might scare some people who are earlier on, but I think it's important. It's important to share your journey and to hopefully either help people who are earlier on understand what's in store, or for people who are further along, laugh along. Such a fun listen there. I did want to ask a little bit about a Real Queer America and the cross-country road trip that went along with it. What was the original inspiration for that project?
Yeah, so after the 2016 election, a lot of folks were I was encountering some disparaging statements about red states. There was briefly, I believe, a push in some quarters for California to secede. People were saying, oh, the red states are just a drain on our resources, and then they go and elect someone like Donald Trump. And I started exploring my gender in Utah. I came out in Georgia. I met my wife in Indiana. We lived together and got married in Florida. My queer trans experience has taken place against a red state backdrop. And so when I was encountering that sentiment after the election, and a lot of journalists were kind of heading into the middle of the country to try to figure out, like, oh, how did Donald Trump happen? I wanted to kind of do the opposite and go into the middle of the country and say, this is the kind of like LGBTQ organizing and activism that's going to stop someone like Donald Trump soon enough. I wanted to go and show the kind of queer America that I know and that had shaped and formed me, and offer kind of a more optimistic counterpoint to some of the despair people were feeling.
Something you touch on several times in the novel are the privileges you have that allowed you to undertake the effort, having the time and resources to travel, being white, and having blending privileges. Do you think a trans woman of color would have had the same experiences you had while on the road? And what does that say about the disparity in trans lives in the U.S.?
To answer the question forthrightly, I absolutely not. I don't see necessarily a trans woman of color feeling comfortable doing the road trip that I did. You see so many Confederate flags between kind of little blue oases, and then even within cities. One of the most eye-opening experiences for me was in Bloomington, Indiana, where I met my wife and had this kind of whirlwind summer romance in 2013, early in transition. I interviewed a Black bisexual woman who said that she didn't really even feel comfortable holding hands with her own partner in public in Bloomington all the time. And she lives there. It's her home. For me, it was just like I parachuted in, fell in love real quick, felt totally comfortable, and got out. And so, yeah, the trip for me was that kind of a constant process of always having to kind of examine my own privilege and realize that even the very concept of the book was something that my privilege was allowing me to execute.
Yeah. Queer friendships and community building are an important part of queer identities. It's something that I've come to understand along the way in my journey, but it's definitely something that I didn't understand until after I came out. What does chosen family mean to you? And what does it mean for so many queer Americans who find themselves in red states and beyond?
It means everything, especially, if your nuclear family or blood family doesn't accept you for who you are. I fortunately, like my parents, I came out in 2012. I left the church in 2008. After I left the church, there was kind of this rocky period, and then we just started to heal from it. And then I was like, oh, wait, one more thing. Like, I left the church and I'm also transgender. And then we had to spend another few years kind of healing and recovering from that. And while we were in that kind of really tense process of healing, it was so important to me to make friends that felt to me like they had the urgency of someone that I was blood related to. Sorry, there's an airplane passing overhead. But, for Real Queer America, I did that whole trip with my friend Billy, who feels like a brother to me, honestly. And that's, I think, the beauty of these queer relationships is we have the tragedy and pain often of being distanced from family members, rejected, sometimes disavowed. But it also allows us to form these really beautiful, tender relationships that might not feel as urgent otherwise.
I've found that those relationships are so important to me in my life and the way it looks today. And I would have no idea of that prior to transitioning, but, starting my transition and finding other people who are sort of at, similar points in their transition, we built that bond together, the shared traumas, the shared experiences as we went through the processes together. I'll say that even in the case of Real Queer America, the copy of the book I have here was actually sent to me as a Christmas gift by one of the people I consider a sister, who I met in this process. And I think those relationships, that support is just so important. So it's strange though, it's not like friendship from before transitioning, especially the friendships I had with people who identified as male in a lot of cases, or cisgender people. It's something special. It really is. Queer friendships, queer communities are so special. And I think, for anyone out there who is struggling with the thoughts of being alone, find your people. And whether that's in person or virtually, there's so many opportunities now to connect with people like yourself, or people maybe not quite like yourself, but who have shared ideas and understanding of what you're going through. And I think it's just absolutely essential for our own well-being and safety.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, in Real Queer America, in several of the chapters, I'm interviewing local leaders or local business owners or that kind of thing. But in the Tennessee chapter, I was like, I want this chapter to be about my friends because my friends are my family. So it was kind of like the chosen family chapter in there. And it was about people who feel like family to me in Johnson City, Tennessee.
So this week I had the chance to listen to M to WTF, and I absolutely loved it. So I sort of imagined you delivering it at an open mic night in front of a room filled with trans women, both laughing and covering their faces, depending on the part you were reading at the time. What led to you working with Audible on this project?
I was fresh off of Real Queer America. I was sort of at the tail end of the 12 city book tour for Real Queer America. And I wanted to write another short memoir because, Real Queer America has memoir elements, but it wasn't quite my whole story. And I had written a relationship memoir in the past about meeting my wife called Love and Estrogen. But I wanted to I felt like in my past books, I was sort of dancing around the really embarrassing or hard to reckon with trans experiences, the childhood shame, the rationalization, the coming out, the awkward fledgling baby trans stuff. And I just felt like I had to metabolize it or process it artistically in some way. And the way that I did that was I literally took out the notes app on my phone and just started jotting down things that amused me about, that period. I think I started out by writing down some very like open micy sort of bit about like the difference between using the men's restroom and the women's restroom. And it kind of grew and became more structured and more narrative driven. Audible got interested, and then we worked together. And part of what I love about it is it's written for audio. It's only available to listen to. So I got to be quippy and conversational and fun. It doesn't have to have any statistics or footnotes. It's just, hey, I'm talking to you. I'm telling you a story about my life, and it's going to be silly and heartwarming and weird.
Trying to narrow down a favorite part or section of M2WTF is incredibly difficult, especially when you put lines in there like cast off your cargo shorts and become a better version of yourself, which I relate to hard. But I was really drawn to one of the later chapters where you talk about an almost universal lie that we not only tell ourselves, we tell our loved ones as well. I know I'm guilty of it. It's the lie where we say, we'll still be the same person on the inside after we transition. I'm curious how that played out for you, and why should others be wary of making this promise early in their transition?
I get the need to make the promise because I made the same promise. People, especially people who have attachments to you, friends, family members, they get anxious when you tell them you're a gender other than the one you were assigned at birth. They want to feel like they're still going to be able to do the same things with you, hang out with you in the same way, that being around you won't feel weird, that you won't be too different or that kind of thing. And so you make these promises like, no, it's okay. Like, we'll still play Halo together, like we'll still like have beer pong night or like whatever. Like, and often they're false promises because they're things that you were sometimes maybe doing to like blend in with your friend group in that kind of like rationalizing, self-denying kind of way. So you make all those promises, and then a year later, you're maybe like a totally different person. I know, like, I underwent a lot of like personality changes. I became more extroverted. My interests changed. The way I wanted to talk or relate or hang out with people changed. And so, I sort of regretted making that promise, but my stance on that is like, there's still some core to a person that like you have to be drawn to be somebody's friend. And so I feel like it's on the friends and family to adapt to the new you. And if they want to say, oh, I don't want to be your friend anymore because you don't come over and play beer pong with me anymore, then like, that's on them. They can go find a new friend.
I think what it comes down to is there's no way to deconstruct your gender identity or presentation without deconstructing so much more of your life. When you're open to such a varied and different time in your life, you're going to question some of the other things that you do. And I had no idea, because I made the promise too. I told people, oh, I'll still be me. I'll just be different on the outside. But looking back, 3.5 years later, that was a lie. So many things changed. Just how I viewed myself and what I wanted out of life changed. And in a lot of ways, that was a good thing because I was finally able to grow and become the person who I wanted to be. But there were challenges along the way too. I think it was a contributing factor in the end of my marriage, was just how much I changed through this process. And like I said, I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily, but it has consequences too. So yeah, that was definitely one chapter from the book that just really struck me. And I think I'm going to remember that too when people ask, because people ask for advice, but just, how does this process look? What does this process do? That's one that definitely stuck out to me. So I thought that was important to cover in the new book.
Yeah, you want to have answers for people. You want to be able to say, no, you're going to stay the same, or like, here's how things are going to go. It's much less reassuring to say, I have no idea what's going to happen. You are going to go on this journey and like things are going to happen and things are going to change, and who knows who you'll be on the other side. But that's closer to the truth, I think, even if it's less comforting.
The truth, I think it's better to just give them the truth, right?
I agree.
So you talk a little bit about vocal training in the Audible book, and also give very hilarious examples of vocal training. I wanted to ask, how was it to actually take on recording the book yourself?
I mean, talking like casually with you right now, I'm not like trying super hard, but when I'm like going in a recording booth, I'm like, oh, I really need to like do my little warm ups and my little scales so that I can do it. And it's incredibly nerve wracking because it's going to live and exist and be around forever. I will these days do those warm ups most often before I have to do long phone calls or I'm entering situations where like I would feel uncomfortable if people perceived me as trans. And but mostly around friends and family, I don't feel the need to like really super stretch. But then Audible came calling and it's like, okay, time to get back on those exercises, at least for the 4 days I'm recording this audiobook.
Well, I found it to be a very quick, easy book to listen to. I enjoyed it thoroughly. I want to make sure everyone who's watching out there can find a copy of M to WTF as well. So where can we point people so that they can put it immediately in their queues and listen to it on their drive into work tomorrow?
Go on to Audible. It should be under the New to Plus members tab. I believe it's set up so that if you have an Audible subscription already, this should be one of the free titles that you get like every month or every few weeks or so. So if you're on Audible, if you're using it, it should be very easy to access. Just type in my name or type in, I realize the title is kind of weird and inscrutable, M to WTF, but it was a pun I could not let go of. So you can type that in the search bar too. And I guarantee you it is the only book that exists titled M to WTF. So no redundancies.
So we are just a few days away now from October 11th, which is National Coming Out Day, or maybe it's Kazimierz Pulaski Day. Either way, I know it's an important day in your own history, and it will be for so many who choose to come out on the 11th for the first time to friends and family. What advice do you have for those looking to come out in just a few days?
Oh, gosh. Wow. It's a big question. My number one advice is don't be afraid. However much the discomfort that you fear will happen if you come out to people, the greater discomfort is like keeping that inside yourself. So I'm not here to say everything will be perfect and rosy once you tell people, but I'm saying the internal torment is a lot worse than whatever external cleanup you have to do with friends or family members afterward. And don't do what I do and instead of holding a coming out party, decide that you're too cute and precious and ironic and hipster to have a coming out party. So you call it Kazimierz Pulaski Appreciation Day instead, which is also every October 11th. He's a Polish Revolutionary War hero who deserved to be honored. Well, disgraced really by me using his day as a coming out day.
I couldn't help throw that in. I just thought it was perfect timing. Like of all the weeks to have you on, it was like, okay, I want to get that one in there. That's all the questions I had for you, but I did want to get over to viewer questions that were submitted earlier this week through Instagram. So if you are watching on the live chat right or on YouTube or Facebook and you have any questions for Samantha or Samantha, please go ahead and submit those. We'll try to get to as many as we can in the next 15 minutes or so. But let's go ahead and get started with the first question that was submitted through Instagram. And that is, what is the top thing we can do to move the needle on trans issues in red states?
This is a really interesting question. I think sometimes we can think, oh, we need to move the needle, you need to pull things forward. You need to push the envelope. You need to like really like radically change something in a red state. And there's a place for that. But I think often the answer of how you get that like permanent lasting change is be a stick in the mud. If you come out as trans in a church, say, hi, I'm trans, I'm part of the church. What are you going to do about it? Or if you come out as trans in a conservative family in a red state, do the same thing. Say, I'm still here. We're still going to do Christmas or Hanukkah together. Like we're still a family. If you kind of insist on still being seen as part of your community, as part of your faith group, as part of your friend circle, like you enact that change just by being stubborn long enough for people to see you as human. And it sucks that there's that kind of gap where you have to just kind of sit around while people get over it. But I think stubbornness goes a long way.
Yeah, visibility is revolution at the end of the day. And whether you're, on a national platform or whether you're just going to Thanksgiving dinner, your visibility, your presence is making a difference in people in your life, in friends and family. And these are people who ultimately go and vote. So, while it's a tide of change, it happens one person at a time. And I think what you said really sums that up well.
Yeah.
All right. Our next question here. Let's see here. This is a loaded question. At what age did you find out you were transgender? Verbiage.
I appreciate the question. I don't want to make fun of the question, but sometimes I feel like there is an approach of like, when did you get the newspaper on your doorstep that told you that you were transgender? And that didn't happen. That doesn't really happen
a singing
for any
telegram,
of us.
actually.
Someone knocking on your door, you're trans, leaves, and then you're
Aww.
like 5 years old and you're like, what does that word mean? Yeah, for me, it starts out as this like really inchoate, like indescribable sense that something was wrong. You're a kid, you can't articulate things. My earliest memory, and I write about this in the book, is stealing my sister's clothes out of her dresser when I was like really little, like barely remember it little. So to me, the question is like, well, I didn't even know the word transgender until I was probably 19 years old. So like, I suppose I had inklings and inclinations all my life, but like, you don't really piece things together. Like your whole early life, at least for my generation, we're in the same generation, is spent like piecing that puzzle together and then finally like solving it, like some movie with a big twist at the end or something like that.
Yeah, there is not a book that you receive at birth that explains these feelings that we're having. I can remember having feelings of being in the wrong body or just incongruent with my identity very young, 5, 6 years old. But finding the words, finding the word is one thing, right? Finding the word to describe yourself is one thing. Finding that self-acceptance is an entirely other thing. I knew how I felt by the time I was in my teens, and I had a word that explained it. Actually being able to say that word about myself took me the better part of another 20 years. It's a journey. It really is a journey into self-understanding and self-acceptance. And I think everyone's story is just so different and varied too. We all have our way of finding our way here.
Yeah, it's this long, confusing journey. I mean, I remember like being in elementary school or middle school, like looking in the school library and the indexes of like encyclopedias, like trying to figure out what was going on. And I realized I'm being a bit of like, back in my day, we trans women had to walk uphill both ways in the snow to school. But like, it's true. We didn't have access to that immediate information. Not saying it's a cakewalk to come out these days either. I mean, look at everything that's going on. But I do think that it's huge that there's more immediate access to information, to people on social media who know what you're going through, who can serve as possibility models for you. I wish I had that.
Me too. All right, let's go to our next question here. What's the best way to approach coming out to a religious family?
I am extremely not the person to give advice to this because a friend of mine told my parents for me because I was too scared to do it myself. So don't do that. That's bad. That's the number one thing. come out yourself directly to them. So learn from my mistakes. Don't do as I say, not as I do. I think when I came out to my parents are both devout Mormons. They're not ultra conservative. They were more Republican identified when I was kind of in high school age, and have kind of drifted leftward ever since. But I think I had this expectation that they should be able to get on board immediately. They should have the right pronoun, the right name, and a perfect understanding within like 2 months of me coming out. And in a perfect world, that can happen. And I'm trying to be kind to myself because, when you spend so long denying something and bottling up who you are, when you finally get the chance to express that and be who you are, I kind of wanted to just go full steam ahead. I wanted like everyone to be on board. We don't need to talk about it anymore. Like, let's just go. Let's put our foot on the gas and get this show on the road. So I found my parents being like, wait, we don't understand what's this and what's that. I found that irritating. And my advice is don't be irritated by that. Be as patient and forgiving as you can possibly allow, so long as people aren't drawing a flat like line in the sand of saying like, I'm not going to accept you, or I'm going to dehumanize you, or emotionally abuse or manipulate you. Like if people are on the right track in a religious family toward accepting you, it kind of encourage that, and be as patient as you possibly can with it. And I hate saying that because it sounds like I'm putting the burden on like marginalized people to do emotional work, and it sucks, but we kind of do like have to do that sometimes if we want to preserve relationships.
Yeah, you touched on something important, the difference between somebody who's struggling but trying and somebody who's struggling and isn't really trying, right? Or doesn't want to try, or doesn't want to accept you. And it's hard because we know ourselves very well. We've been dealing with this for the better part of our lifetimes, and then we throw this on our parents and say, this is being accepted. we had a chance to prepare.
Yeah, we give them the newspaper. we
yeah,
or
exactly.
The singing telegram.
We're the ones delivering the letter. So I mean, I didn't have quite the same experience with my parents, but they still struggled. I mean, they still struggled with their child. I know that my mom in particular really struggled with just how long I was in pain and that she didn't know. But then the name and the pronoun, it still took her time. It took her time, but she tried. And I gave her that time. It was hard. It's very hard, but I could see her working through it, and she continued working through it. And I'm glad I did. I'm glad I didn't, take the nuclear approach with her, or an ultimatum approach. And I think that made a big difference in that process for her. And I think it got both of us to a better place over time.
I've had similar conversations with my own mother after she's like read my books, where she's like, the number one sentiment she wants to express is like, I didn't know you were in that much pain, and I wish I had known. And at the same time, you're a closeted trans kid, and you're hiding things, and you're hiding that pain. And it's I mean, you try not to regret the like years that you lost by just not like vocalizing it to each other. But there's something beautiful, I think, and later in life in that relationship, in that parental relationship, kind of coming around and forgiving each other. I don't know.
I think there is. I think you're absolutely onto something there. My relationship with my parents is better now than it ever was growing up, because I don't have to hide anything. I can just be me, and they accept that.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful. It really is a beautiful thing when it works out that way.
The difference, and they're not great parents out there, but most parents, like at the end of the day, do want their kids to be happy. And so for me, that was like the process of like, you're just going to see that I'm happy. Like, you're going to doubt and question this now and think that this is like weird or just a phase. But, fast forward 8 years, like, you're going to see that I'm still like so much happier than I was like in my early 20s or in my teenage years, and you're going to realize like this had to happen. It's a bit of a long game, but worth it for having a relationship with your parents, I think.
Yeah, definitely. All right, let's get on to our next question here. This is a change in topic. Have you ever written a song before?
Many songs. I wrote albums worth of like indie, kind of moody little hipster indie, like acoustic-y songs in college.
Okay, I'm going to need all of these
yeah,
re-recorded and released on Twitter immediately. Can we please get these out
they
next week?
they have been banished from the internet. I promise you that. No, I like some of them, but it goes back to like the vocal training aspect where like, you know, I'm singing in like a register of my voice I don't really like to use anymore. That makes me feel a little dysphoric. So I'll only like, I'll listen to them occasionally when I feel like I have the emotional fortitude for it. But it's funny because, you know, you go back and listen to this music that I was writing as like an angsty 21-year-old. And so many of the lyrics are just like coded lyrics about like being trans that are like circling around it. I mean, I feel like you can do the same with like, you know, Laura Jane Grace's like work with Against Me, like pre-transition, where you can go trace the lyrics and be like, yeah, this was coming. I see it. I'm no Laura Jane Grace. I flatter myself with that comparison, but yeah, similar sort of foreshadowing lyrically happening.
All right, the last couple of questions we had deal with the writing process a little bit. What is your favorite and least favorite part of writing?
My least favorite part of writing is right now when you are done and it's in the world and people are seeing it. For some reason, that's terrifying to me. And because I am a Capricorn and I have like extreme border collie goal-oriented brain, it's hard for me to like feel anything at the completion of a project. I just like want to do the next thing and hope that that makes me feel something, even though, you know, it's been however many books now and I've never gotten the nirvana that I thought I would get from the last one. My favorite part is that part mid-writing where you really crack the structure of something and then the rest becomes fill in the blanks. It feels like when you're doing a crossword puzzle and like you just have like one corner left. Like you're like, yes, I know I can finish it. I know it's just a matter of like mechanistic exercise now. I've got it down. It's thrilling. That's the real high. The real high of writing for me is not when it comes out and people say very kind, nice, generous things about it. The high is the moment where you're like, I know what it's going to look like in the end. I just have to get it there.
All right. Our last question that was submitted through Instagram. You've worked at so many amazing journalistic institutions. Do any stand out for their inclusive culture?
Oh, Fusion is near and dear to my heart. Did you ever read Fusion? It was kind of a progressive news site owned by Univision that was kind of marketed at millennials and a younger audience. Anyway, this is deep media history, but Fusion was this kind of dream of like a diverse, young, like progressive news outlet. And I worked for Fusion for literally, I think, like a month. And it was my dream job. And there was some reorganization at the company, and then it was no more. But that beautiful month was great. These days, you know, like it's hard. Queer media is really struggling with funding, with staffing, with having enough money to have staff positions. So I feel for folks who are still, you know, doing LGBTQ journalism day in and day out, because I feel like I had my dream and then it got shattered immediately.
All right. I wanted to go over to Stephen. Do we have some questions, Stephen? Okay. Here we go. Question for Samantha Allen. What medium was your favorite to work with? Writing, audiobook, TV, or something else?
Whew. I really enjoyed writing this audiobook. Maybe in terms of like sheer pleasure, writing the audiobook was like my favorite experience over writing, 2 print books previously. Well, one digital book, one traditional print book. It was just so fun to be able to write directly to a listener. It was intimate and warm. It unlocks the ability, you can do this in a print book too, but it's different when someone hears your voice, to use the second person. You can just talk to someone. You can just say, here I am in the car with you. Like, where are we going? And that just unlocked this like level of excitement for me that M to WTF is probably about half the length of Real Queer America, but I wrote it in much less than half the time, certainly, because it was just such a breeze when you feel like you're just having a conversation with a friend.
And that's really what it felt like listening to it. It felt like I was on a car trip with somebody who was just talking about their life, and it's really wonderful. So I do want to give a chance once again to tell people where to find the book on Audible. And then also, where can people get in touch with you on social media?
Yeah, I am at SLA Writes on Twitter, or Slaw Writes, as some people who think I perform rituals with coleslaw pronounce it. I am on Instagram, although I'm private, but I approve people, at Neebess, Neebess. And my website is SamanthaLeeAllen.com. You can shoot me an email there, read my writing, find links to my books, that kind of thing.
All right. This has been a really amazing conversation. I really appreciate your time here tonight, Samantha. I love your work. I can't wait to see what you have coming out in the future. But thank you so much for sharing your story with us. Definitely recommend people check out M2WTF on Audible this week. It's free for most people, so very much worth a listen. We are getting very close to the end of Trans IRL Season 2 here, so please continue to monitor our Instagram page if you would like updates on who our final guests will be this season. As a reminder, if you want to get notifications when we go live, don't forget to subscribe on our YouTube channel over at Trans IRL. Our past episodes are up there as well. On Facebook, we're also broadcasting live at Trans IRL Show, and of course our Instagram page is Trans IRL. So don't forget to like and follow us there. You can submit your questions before we get going here, and we can try to answer as many as possible. But let's go ahead and bring everyone on here. And Stephen, thank you as always for keeping things running smoothly in the background there. Uh-oh, no audio.
Stephen, you need to speak to us.
It'd be nice if I hit the button, wouldn't it? This is no, this was a joy. See, it was going to be a perfect show until we did that, but it was great. And just thanks to everyone for chatting with us this evening, kind of doing double duty, and some great stories from Tiffany, from Louise, from Rachel, Claire, Taylor. Feels like the Mickey Mouse Club here. Catherine is on, so thank you all very much for hanging out with us tonight.
Yeah,
this was a pleasure.
Samantha, thank you again for joining us. Yeah, this is great. I think we should have more Samanthas on, actually. Stephen, is there a way we can maybe add 2 or 3 other Samanthas for next week's show?
Oh, that would be fantastic. I am ready to go for that.
9
That would be
Samanthas.
amazing.
We can find enough trans Samanthas out there. They are numerous.
That's true. That's true. All right. For everyone in the chat, thank you so much for sharing your stories. Samantha and Stephen, thank you again for your help here on another wonderful episode. We'll see everyone again really soon. A couple more episodes before the end of the season. From all of us here at Trans IRL, thanks again for watching. Have a great night.